the streets of the small village were deserted that chilly winter night. The wind howled between the tightly packed houses, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of imminent rain. Thomas, a middle-aged man with eyes marked by sleepless nights, hurried along the uneven pavement, his backpack and the weight of his worries making him hunch even further. 3 small illuminated windows in the house at the end of the street were his guiding light. Inside, his 3 daughters waited for him, perhaps hungry, perhaps clinging to renewed hope, but always believing their father would return with something to ease their harsh reality. As he passed a nearby bin, close to the grand mansion dominating the hilltop, a sharp sound caught his attention. A tall, poised woman, wrapped in an expensive wool coat, tossed a sizable box into the rubbish. Thomas stopped instinctively, watching as she returned to the luxury car parked nearby. His frostbitten fingers hesitated before lifting the bin's lid, but survival outweighed pride. When he finally opened the box, his eyes widened, and the air fled his lungs. Inside, something unexpected made him tremble, not from the cold, but from sheer despair. 3 days before that life-altering winter night, Thomas's routine was a relentless cycle of physical exhaustion and constant worry. His day began well before dawn, when the village was still blanketed in darkness. With calloused hands and a back worn by years of hard labor, he set off for his job at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The work was grueling. Hour after hour, Thomas hauled heavy boxes, arranged shelves, and managed endless orders. Despite his efforts, his meager wages barely kept a roof over their heads or food on the table for his daughters. Yet, he never complained. There was something in Sarah's eyes, his 12-year-old eldest, that reminded him of his purpose. She was clever and resilient, always helping her younger sisters, 8-year-old Emily and 5-year-old Rosie, who, despite everything, had a smile that defied their struggles. That particular afternoon, after finishing his shift, Thomas stopped at the local bakery. He counted the coins in his pocket, torn between buying bread or milk. Bread won out, he could stretch it further, pairing it with the last bit of butter they had at home. Opening the door to their modest house, he was greeted by a chorus of voices. Emily was helping Sarah hang clothes on a makeshift line in the kitchen, while Rosie played with a patchwork doll. Their smiles were Thomas's only solace. Despite everything, they found joy in the simplest of things. After a modest dinner of bread and tea, the girls gathered around their father for the nightly story, a ritual he upheld even when bone-tired. Thomas often spun tales of heroes who faced insurmountable odds but found strength in their love for family. That evening, however, his voice was hoarser than usual. He didn't know how to tell his daughters that the rent was overdue again and that the landlord was growing impatient. Yet he smiled, concealing his fears behind the words of the story he told. Thomas wasn't fooled, though. He knew Sarah understood the severity of their situation. As the younger two drifted off to sleep on their makeshift mattress, she quietly approached, leaving a small cup of tea by his side. "It'll be all right, Dad," she whispered. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of bills, endless days of toil, and the uncertainty of tomorrow filled him with doubt. That night, he stayed up late, searching for a way to give them the life they deserved. 2 days before he stumbled across the mysterious box in the bin, Thomas faced an especially hard day at work. Summoned to the office of his supervisor, a burly man with a perpetually stern expression, Thomas felt the silence of the room press down on him, heavier than the boxes he carried every day. "Thomas, you know we're facing cuts, don't you?" the supervisor began, flipping through a battered notepad. Thomas nodded, his heart pounding. He'd known this moment was coming, but hadn't expected it so soon. "You're a good worker, but we need to prioritize those who can do extra hours. Given your family situation, "Well, the company has decided that today will be your last day." The words hit him like a pile of bricks. He tried to plead, explaining that he could work harder, that he desperately needed the job. But the supervisor only shook his head, wearing the expression of someone regretting an unavoidable decision. As Thomas left the office, the weight of the world seemed to bear down on him. The walk home felt longer than ever, each step echoing on the empty streets, a grim reminder of the uncertainty ahead. When he arrived home, Sarah was seated at the table, helping Emily with her homework. Rosie was fast asleep on the sofa, clutching her patchwork doll. Thomas forced a smile as he passed them, but Sarah caught the hollow look in her father's eyes. "Are you all right, Dad?" she asked, her brow furrowed. He hesitated before answering, knowing he couldn't keep the truth from them forever. "Things have gotten a little harder, love," he finally said, trying to sound composed. Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if trying to unravel the depth of what he wasn't saying. She didn't press, but that night, after her sisters had fallen asleep, she grabbed a scrap of paper and started writing. It was a list, ideas for ways to earn money. Small jobs she, Thomas, and Emily could take on together. The next day, Thomas stuck to his routine. He left the house early, as though heading to work, but instead wandered the streets, searching for any opportunity. He was met with rejection after rejection. "We're fully staffed," they'd say. "Try again next month." By the time he returned home in the late afternoon, his daughters were gathered around the table, Sarah's list now covered in scribbles and suggestions. "We could sell lemonade, Dad." Rosie chimed in, her excitement palpable, even though she barely understood the gravity of their situation. "Or help with deliveries," Emily added, pointing to another idea on the list. Thomas felt a bittersweet mix of gratitude and sorrow. He was proud of their initiative, but heartbroken that they, so young, were taking on burdens they shouldn't have to bear. Still, he smiled and assured them he'd figure something out. Later that evening, once the girls had fallen asleep, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to conjure a solution that refused to come. That's when he noticed a small detail on Sarah's list. At the very bottom, written in tiny letters, were the words, "No matter what happens, we're together. That's what matters." The next morning, Thomas sat on the small porch of their house, watching the first light of day pierce through the town's fog. His gaze was fixed on a horizon that felt as distant as his fading hopes. He'd promised his daughters everything would be all right, but deep down, he wasn't sure how to make that promise a reality. As he wrestled with his thoughts, Sarah joined him, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. She didn't say a word as she handed him one and sat beside him. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was an unspoken understanding. "We'll get through this, Dad," she finally said, her voice steady despite her youth. Thomas wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. Still, the day unfolded like many before, him setting out to find work and returning empty-handed. That afternoon, as he walked through the town, he passed a park where children played without a care in the world. A pang of envy tugged at him for their innocence, a time that seemed so far removed from his daughters' lives. Then, something unusual caught his eye. Near a row of industrial bins, an elegantly dressed woman was disposing of what looked like a pile of cardboard boxes. She, clearly from a much higher social class, adjusted her sunglasses and glanced around with disdain, as though eager to rid herself of the moment. Curious, Thomas watched as she placed one of the boxes down carefully, unlike the others she tossed aside without a second thought. There was something about her actions that caught his attention. He waited until she was out of sight, driving off in a luxury car that disappeared down the street. Cautiously, Thomas approached the bin. The larger boxes were empty, but the one she had handled so carefully felt heavy. Lifting it, he was surprised by its weight. Though he hesitated for a moment, curiosity and desperation won out, and he decided to take it home. When he arrived, his daughters greeted him with the usual excitement of children blissfully unaware of the true extent of their struggles. "What's that, Dad?" Emily asked, pointing at the box. "I'm not sure," he replied, setting it down on the kitchen table. "But maybe it can help us." Using an old penknife, he carefully cut through the tape sealing the box. Inside, he found something unexpected: neatly organized papers, a stack of official-looking documents. For a moment, he thought there was nothing valuable there, but as he flipped through the papers, his eyes widened in shock. Amidst the documents were envelopes stuffed with cash. A lot of cash. He picked up one of the bundles, his breath catching. His daughters, noticing his reaction, came closer. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice cautious. Thomas hesitated, unsure whether this was a stroke of luck or a trap. "It looks like money, but I don't know where it came from," he admitted. At the bottom of the box was something even stranger, a handwritten letter. Picking it up carefully, he felt a sense of unease as he read the words. "To whoever finds this, know that this money is as much a curse as it is a blessing. Use it wisely, but be aware it comes at a price." The message was cryptic, almost ominous. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. He glanced at his daughters, who were now watching him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. In that moment, a flood of questions filled his mind. Should he use the money to pay off their debts and give his daughters a better life? Or should he return it, even though he had no idea who it belonged to? The dilemma was overwhelming, and the weight of making the right decision made the money feel heavier than ever. Thomas spent the entire night awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the letter and cash spread out before him. The enormity of the decision pressed down on him. His daughters slept in the small room next door, blissfully unaware of the turmoil he faced. As the hours passed, he went over every possible option in his mind. By morning, with dark circles under his eyes, Thomas called Sarah, Emily, and Rosie to the table. He decided to be honest with them, even though they were just children. "Girls, I need your help to think this through. Yesterday, I found this box, and inside, there's money. A lot of money." Emily, just 7 years old, beamed innocently. "Can we buy sweets, Dad?" Sarah, always the practical one, frowned. "Where did it come from?" "It's not ours, Dad." Rosie, still clutching her teddy, just stared, half asleep. Thomas sighed, trying to explain as simply as he could. "I don't know where it's from. But at the same time, I can't ignore the fact that this could change our lives." Sarah fixed him with a serious look. "What if we use it, and someone comes looking for it? What if it's dangerous?" Her concern was valid, but Thomas also knew that their immediate needs couldn't wait. He made a decision. "We'll use some of it to take care of the most urgent things. The rest, I'll keep safe. I'll be careful with everything." In the days that followed, Thomas began using the money cautiously. He paid off the landlord, ensuring they wouldn't be evicted. He bought fresh food and a new set of clothes for each of his daughters. For the first time in months, they sat down to a full, hearty meal. But even in the face of these small victories, Thomas couldn't shake the weight of that letter. The warning about the money being a curse echoed endlessly in his mind. Determined to make the money work for them rather than just spending it, Thomas started researching ideas for a small business. His limited experience as a carpenter gave him a potential avenue to explore. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood with Sarah, he noticed a shop selling used tools. Using a portion of the money, he bought a second-hand electric saw, a few hammers, and nails. He converted the small shed at the back of their house into a makeshift workshop. The idea was simple: make small pieces of furniture and sell them at the local market. Sarah, ever curious, helped him sand the wood and paint the finishes, while Emily and Lucy added colorful drawings to decorate the pieces. Before long, the furniture had a unique charm that caught the attention of buyers. Their first weekend at the market was a mix of nerves and hope. Thomas set up a modest stall showcasing the furniture he'd managed to finish: coffee tables, simple shelves, and storage boxes. To his surprise, people stopped, complimented his work, and started buying. By the end of the day, he returned home with more money than he had expected. The girls waited eagerly at the door to hear how it went. "It was a success, girls," he said, holding up the small bundle of notes he'd earned. Emily jumped with joy, but Sarah, ever cautious, reminded him, "We still need to be careful, Dad." As months passed, the family's life began to improve. Thomas no longer had to knock on doors looking for odd jobs. He had his own business now, and the shed-turned-workshop became a symbol of hope for their family. The girls began dreaming again. Sarah wanted to use some of the money to buy books and return to school. Emily, always the creative one, suggested they design furniture for children. Lucy, with her characteristic sweetness, asked only for a swing to play on in the garden. But as life got better, Thomas couldn't ignore an uneasy feeling. The money seemed to bring both fortune and misfortune. Neighbors began casting curious glances their way, asking probing questions about how he turned things around so quickly. One evening, while working in the workshop, Thomas heard footsteps outside in the garden. He stood up quickly, heart pounding. When he opened the door, no one was there. But something unusual caught his eye: a piece of paper taped to the door. The note read, "You thought no one would notice. Everyone has a price." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Someone knew about the money. And now, he needed to protect his family at all costs. He locked the workshop and rushed back into the house, his mind racing. He couldn't let the girls see how shaken he was. Sarah, ever observant, noticed the worry etched on his face. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked. He hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but he also couldn't bring himself to tell her the full truth. "I'm just tired, love. I need a bit of time to think." That night, as the girls slept, Thomas stayed awake, holding the note in his hands. Someone knew about the money, but who? He mentally replayed every recent interaction. Could it have been someone from the market? A neighbor? Or even the woman who had thrown the box away? By morning, he decided he couldn't sit idly by. He had to act to keep his family safe. Thomas took a portion of the remaining money and sought out a local solicitor. He needed to know how to protect what they'd built and if there was a way to uncover the origins of the money. The solicitor, a serious and experienced man, listened intently as Thomas explained the situation, leaving out certain details. "You'll need to tread very carefully, Mr. Thomas," the solicitor warned. "If the money is traceable and linked to anything unlawful, it could bring serious consequences." Thomas returned home more anxious than ever. He knew he'd have to keep an even lower profile. Despite the tension, the furniture business continued to thrive. Orders grew larger and more profitable, and Thomas used some of the money to upgrade the workshop with tools that made the work more efficient. Still, he avoided spending excessively. Most of the money remained locked in a hidden safe in the workshop, with the key always kept on him. Sarah, on the other hand, pushed for them to use the profits to improve their living conditions. She dreamed of moving to a safer neighborhood where Lucy and Emily could play without worry. "Dad, there's no point staying here if we can afford somewhere better now," she argued. Thomas knew she was right, but he feared that a move would draw even more attention. "Let's wait a little longer, Sarah. I need to be sure we're ready," he replied. Around that time, a new figure began appearing in the neighborhood. He was a man with a plain appearance but carried himself with an air of authority. He seemed to be wherever Thomas went, at the market, watching from a distance, or loitering near the houses. Sarah was the first to notice. "Dad, that man, is he following us?" Thomas tried to reassure her. "Probably just a coincidence. But I'll keep an eye on him." One afternoon, as Thomas was packing up his stall at the market, the man approached. He was polite, but his manner was unnervingly direct. "I hear your business is doing well. Congratulations." Thomas responded cautiously. "Thanks. I'm just trying to take care of my family." The man smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. "Maybe I can help. I know you started with a little extra help. Don't worry, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to offer an opportunity." Thomas's stomach churned. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said stiffly. The man shrugged and left a business card on the stall. "If you change your mind, give me a call. I'm sure we can help each other out." When Thomas got home, he threw the card in the bin, but the man's word stayed with him. Who was he? How did he know about the money? And what did he want in return? Paranoia began to take hold. Thomas installed extra locks on the house and reinforced the workshop door. Even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The girls started noticing the change in their father. One evening, Lucy asked innocently, "Daddy, why are you always worried?" Thomas knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Because I love you and want to keep you safe," he said softly. Feeling cornered, Thomas decided to take matters into his own hands. He started digging through the internet for information about the wealthy woman who had thrown the box away. Hours of searching led him to a photo of her at a charity event. She appeared to be a well-known philanthropist, but something stood out: the event had taken place before the incident with the box. It was as if she had disappeared afterward. Thomas began connecting the dots. The note, the mysterious man, the money, everything seemed intertwined. He had to make a choice: keep living with the risk or find out the truth about the money, even if it meant letting it go. That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with the threatening note in one hand and a cup of cold coffee in the other. The tension was suffocating, but deep down, he knew he needed a new approach. He had to outsmart those who were watching him. An idea struck him suddenly, like a spark. He stared at the money in the safe and thought, if they think the money is all I have, maybe I can throw them off. Thomas decided it was time to start fresh, but in a way that would confuse anyone keeping tabs on him. The next morning, he called Sarah for a talk. "I'm going to donate the money, Sarah." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? Dad, that doesn't make any sense. This money pulled us out of the hole." He held his daughter's hands firmly and said, "If we keep it, we'll always be looking over our shoulders. But I won't rush into this. First, I'll get a proper job. We need something stable, something no one will question. Sarah hesitated but saw the resolve in her father's eyes. Despite her fear, she nodded in agreement. Thomas began spreading the word that he was looking for work. He visited local shops, garages, and even a small factory nearby. When people asked why he was changing direction, he smiled and replied, "I want to give my daughters a better future, something more secure." Meanwhile, he made quiet donations to small, trustworthy local charities. He chose places where the money could genuinely make a difference without drawing attention. Each donation was left in an anonymous envelope with the simple message, "Use this to help those in need." With every envelope he handed over, Thomas felt a little lighter. Sarah also played her part. She took on a part-time job at a local bakery while helping her father care for Lucy and Emily. Together, with their modest earnings, they managed to cover the basics. Thomas eventually landed a job at a metal workshop. The work was tough, but he approached it with gratitude. Each passing day felt like he was building something solid, something real. One afternoon, as he worked, Thomas had an unexpected visitor. It was the same mysterious man who'd approached him at the market. He appeared out of nowhere, wearing that same enigmatic smile. "So, you've decided to settle down, have you?" Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and replied calmly, "I just want a simple life for my family." The man studied him for a long moment before saying, "I hope you get what you're after, Thomas. But remember, not everything is as simple as it seems." And with that, he left. Thomas knew the encounter wasn't meaningless. Even so, he stuck to his plan. He hadn't gotten rid of all the money. He kept a small amount hidden in a place only he knew. If things went wrong, he wanted something to fall back on for his daughter's sake. But the rest of the money? It would be donated. Deep down, he knew he couldn't cling to something that brought so much risk. As time passed, Thomas began to notice the rewards of his decisions. The community respected him, his neighbors saw him as a hard-working man, and his daughters felt safer. Although he still carried the weight of his secret, he'd found a kind of peace. Yet, he knew the battle wasn't over. The past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it. Months went by, and Thomas settled into his new life. He worked hard at the metal shop, his hands toughened by the daily grind. His routine was simple, but it brought a tranquility he hadn't felt in years. Sarah continued working at the bakery, while Lucy and Emily thrived at school, free from the constant worry that had once hung over their home. The money, now long gone from his hands, felt like a ghost of the past. But fate had other plans. One day, during a coffee break, a man entered the workshop. He was tall, plainly dressed, but there was a spark in his eyes. He seemed hesitant yet determined as he approached Thomas, holding an envelope. "You're Thomas, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice tinged with emotion. Thomas nodded, intrigued. "That's right. Can I help you?" The man took a deep breath before speaking. "My name's Carlos. A few months back, I received an envelope with money in it. There wasn't a name, but I found out it came from you." Thomas stayed silent, his heart racing. He hadn't expected anyone to track down his donations. Before he could respond, Carlos continued. "I was on the brink of losing everything, you know. My little shop was about to close for good. I used the money to buy stock, pay off debts, and, well, it turned things around. My business is thriving again. Now, I want to give something back." Carlos held out the envelope, full of money. "Here's the amount, with interest. It's the least I can do." Thomas hesitated. He hadn't made his donations expecting anything in return, but the look in Carlos's eyes made it clear that refusing would deny him the relief he was trying to offer. At last, Thomas accepted, thanking him sincerely. The event left Thomas deep in thought. He never imagined his actions would have such a direct impact. That night, as he counted the money, he felt a mix of surprise and gratitude. Some of what he had given away was coming back, but in a way that felt honest, like a circle being completed. A few months later, when life had regained a sense of calm, another surprise came knocking. A car pulled up outside his modest home, an unusual sight in the humble neighborhood. Thomas stepped out to see who it was and found a well-dressed man with a warm smile. "You must be Thomas." "I'm Enrique, owner of Tecnosolucos." The name wasn't familiar, but Enrique quickly explained. "Some time ago, I received a significant sum from an anonymous donor. With that money, I was able to start my technology company. Today, we're growing fast, and I have a place for you." Thomas was stunned. "I don't understand." "Why me?" Enrique smiled. "Because that money changed my life. It was a gesture I'll never forget, and now I want to give something back. We have an opening in administration, and from what I've heard, you're exactly the kind of person we need, hardworking, honest, and resilient." The offer seemed almost too good to be true, but Enrique wasn't joking. He handed Thomas a card with all the details. "Take your time to think about it. If you decide to join us, you'll be more than welcome." Thomas spent days mulling over the opportunity. Working at Tecnosolucos meant leaving the metal workshop, a place where he had rebuilt his confidence. But it also meant a more stable future for his daughters and the chance to grow professionally. In the end, he accepted. The transition was challenging, but Thomas adapted quickly, bringing the same dedication to his new role that he had always shown. Over time, he became one of the most respected employees in the company. Sitting at his new desk in a sleek, modern office, Thomas glanced at a photo of his daughters he had placed there. He thought about how far he had come since the day he'd found the box. The money, which had once seemed like a curse, had turned into an opportunity, not just for him, but for others as well. Thomas knew there would still be challenges ahead, but now he had something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Above all, he had the certainty that every choice and every sacrifice had been worth it. Thomas's future looked brighter than ever, but he never forgot his role as a father. His eldest daughter, Sarah, was beginning to show interest in the professional world, and he wanted to give her a better start than he'd had in his youth. After weeks of working at Tecnosolucos, Thomas decided to speak with Enrique. One afternoon, he requested a private meeting. Sitting in Enrique's spacious office, Thomas got straight to the point. "Enrique, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, but I have a daughter, Sarah, who's finishing school soon. She's bright, hardworking, and eager to learn. I was wondering if there might be an opportunity for her to work here as an apprentice once she finishes her studies." Enrique smiled warmly. "Thomas, you're one of the most dedicated employees I've ever met. If your daughter has even half of your work ethic, she'll be a fantastic addition to the team. Don't worry, we'll sort it out when the time comes." Thomas felt a wave of relief and pride. That conversation marked another step towards the future he had always dreamed of for his daughters. A few days later, Thomas decided to spend a weekend with his family. Sarah, Lucy, and Emily were thrilled when he suggested a trip to the city park. It was a simple place but special, a spot where they could relax and enjoy themselves. While the younger girls ran and played, Thomas and Sarah sat on a nearby bench, watching them with quiet contentment. Suddenly, Thomas saw something that made his heart race. A few meters away, a woman strolled gracefully, her elegance unmistakable. It was her, the wealthy woman he'd seen months ago, throwing that mysterious box into the rubbish. He froze, his mind flooded with memories of that day. "Dad, you all right?" Sarah asked, noticing the change in his expression. "I'm fine, love. I just need to take care of something. Look after your sisters for me, I'll be right back." Thomas stood and walked towards the woman. His heart pounded, but he knew this was something he had to do. When he was close enough, he called out to her. "Excuse me." She turned to him, surprised to see a simple, humble man approaching her. "Yes? How can I help you?" Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he wanted to say. "My name's Thomas. I think we need to talk about something that happened a few months ago." The woman looked puzzled but intrigued. He began to explain. "I was near that alley the day you threw a box into the bin. After you left, I opened it and found a lot of money inside." Her eyes widened, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "At first, I didn't know what to do. I kept the money, but it didn't feel right. I decided to donate most of it to people who needed it more than me. The little I kept helped me rebuild my life. Today, I've got a good job, and I'm making plans for my daughter's futures." The woman stared at him, her face unreadable, before finally speaking. "So, you really took that money?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, but I never used it to show off or take advantage. Everything I did was to improve our lives and help others. I don't expect anything from you, I just felt I needed to tell you the truth." To his surprise, the woman began to smile, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "You know, when I threw that box away, it was a test. I was tired of seeing money cause so much harm. I wanted to see if someone would use it differently." Thomas was stunned. "A test?" She nodded. "Yes. And from what you've told me, you passed." She extended her hand to him. "Thomas, I never thought I'd hear this story, but I'm glad I did. It sounds like you've done far more good with that money than I ever could." They stood there in silence for a moment before she added, "If you ever need anything in the future, don't hesitate to find me." Thomas thanked her but knew he already had everything he needed, his family, his job, and the reassurance that he'd made the right choices. As he walked back to where Sarah and the girls were waiting, he felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Life went on, but now with more hope than he'd ever imagined possible. Thomas took a deep breath, his voice trembling with emotion as he recounted everything he'd been through since finding that box. "That money, it changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. At first, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I've always lived simply but honestly. Keeping it felt wrong, but wasting it would have been worse." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I donated most of it. Families on the brink, people who barely had enough to eat, helping them was the only thing that felt right. And, you know, it gave me a kind of peace I'd never felt before." The woman listened intently, her face serious, though her eyes revealed genuine interest. But that wasn't the end, Thomas continued. "That money still attracted attention. People started to get suspicious, to follow me, to spread rumors. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. I even had to move house to keep my daughters safe." Thomas glanced briefly at the park, where Sarah and her sisters were laughing and playing. All of this made me realize I didn't want a life full of secrets. I started working a decent job, trying to rebuild my life honestly. Yet, the impact of that money lingered. People I helped came back, some to thank me, others offering things I never imagined, like better jobs or even opportunities for my daughter. He smiled, a mixture of relief and pride. Now, I've got plans for their future. Sarah, my eldest, might start working at a good company. We're living simply but with dignity. The woman remained silent for a long moment, taking in everything Thomas had shared. Then, with a cryptic tone, she replied, "You've been through so much, Thomas. But there's still much more to come." Thomas furrowed his brow, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" She smiled faintly, as if she knew something he couldn't yet comprehend. Life has a curious way of surprising us, especially when we act with kindness and courage. What you've done isn't just about changing your own life. You've planted seeds that will continue to grow, even if you can't yet see the fruits. Her words lingered in Thomas's mind like a mysterious promise filled with possibility. Though he didn't fully understand what she meant, he felt he was on the right path, not just for himself, but for his daughters and everyone whose lives he had touched through his generosity. As he walked back to his family, he looked up at the sky and smiled. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like an open field, full of opportunities he had never dared to dream of. In the days that followed, Thomas realized his conversation with the millionaire had closed an important chapter of his life. He returned to his routine with his family, but something within him had changed forever. The experiences he had gone through taught him the true value of money and, more importantly, the value of generosity. The money, which he once thought was the answer to all his problems, had proven to be a powerful tool, not just for changing his own life, but for transforming the lives of others. Months later, while walking to work, he was stopped by a man who seemed deeply moved. It was one of the people he had helped with his donations, someone he barely remembered. "Thomas, I'll never forget what you did for me. That money you gave me helped get my family off the streets. Now we've got a home, my wife's got a job, and my kids are in school. All because you believed in me when no one else did." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. That moment wasn't just a thank you, it was confirmation that he'd made the right choices. He shook the man's hand, expressed his gratitude, and continued on his way, feeling lighter than ever. That evening, as he shared dinner with his daughters, he reflected on everything that had happened. The woman's words echoed in his mind, "You planted seeds that will continue to grow." He realized that true wealth wasn't about money itself, but about the positive impact it could have on the world. From then on, Thomas continued living with simplicity and integrity. He kept a small portion of the money aside for emergencies and his daughter's education, but never stopped helping those around him. He became a respected figure in his community, not for the money he once had, but for the generosity with which he lived his life. Thomas's story, and the mystery of the money, became a lesson for many. True wealth lies in the kindness we spread and the impact we leave on others. And, as the millionaire had said, many more changes would come. Not because Thomas had money, but because he had chosen to use the best of himself, his kindness, his courage, and his determination. The legacy of his choices would live on, not just in the lives he touched, but in the future generations who would be inspired by his story. And that was the story of Thomas, a prime example of how kindness and generosity can transform lives in ways we can't even imagine. Now, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you came across an unexpected sum like that? Would you donate it, save it, or invest it? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any more inspiring stories like this. And you know what's even better? You can keep getting moved by incredible stories by clicking on the video that's popping up in the card right now. Don't forget, every choice we make has the power to change the world around us. See you in the next video.